I won't be saying much in French today. Bonjour. Let's see. Comment vas-tu? Let's see. My name? Je m'appelle Mike Zellers. All right. Let's see. Je suis très fatigué. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. What was that?
When she just did to her knee, I knew.
Oh, bang it on the, yeah. Yeah. The labs upstairs are like that as well. Hi, this is Mike. I'm ready to record. Thank you. All right. All right. Good morning. As you might be able to tell, we have a couple or several visitors in our class today, students from France. What school are you from in France? Okay. All right. And they're here visiting Lorraine Community College, and they're visiting some other classes. And I was asked if I would want to have them in my class, and I said sure. I mean, anyone can show up in any of my classes. I don't care. Open invite. You know, anytime. That goes for any of you folks, you know. And I'm not joking. I'm being serious. All right. Today we're going to talk about HTML tables and how to create tables on your web page. All right. Before we start talking about that, let's be sure we understand what I mean when I say a table. All right. When I'm speaking of a table, what I mean is a table of data. All right. A table of data being like something that you might find in Excel. In other words, rows and columns of data. All right. Let's think of some of the things that you might represent in a table. All right. You might represent comparing several things. You know, let's say, for example, you are comparing several different mobile phones. All right. You might have something that looks like this. By the way, these lectures are recorded and posted to YouTube, all right? So that's just so you know why we're in this special room with the cameras and all that stuff. Let's say we were comparing different mobile phones. We might have a table that looks like this. Oh, come on in. More. Wow. Hi. Hey, no problem. We might have a table that looks like this. We might have manufacturer. And we might have the model name. And we might have stuff like, you know, how much memory is in it. And we might have how many pixels the camera size is. And then we might have, you know, rows of data in this table. Going down the line with rows of data that correspond to the different columns that we have. So that's what we mean when I talk about a table of data. All right. Other things, you know, a schedule, for example. You know, if we were going to represent what classes are available in spring, we might have something that looks like this. We might have the course name, the course number, the credit hours, the days that it's being taught, the days and times, and the instructor. All right? And maybe the first course is web development. All right? Which has this as the course number, and it's 3 credit hours, and it meets maybe Monday and Wednesday, and the instructor is me. And so on down the line through all the courses that are listed. All right? Anyhow, that's what I mean when I say a table of data. All right? I mean where you have columns, distinct columns, and distinct rows. Now, if we were trying to build that in HTML without using the table tag, we'd have a mess. Let's look at an example. Actually, the word got out how great my lectures are that now people are coming in from all over the world to hear them. So you might have a harder time finding a seat today. So let's take this and let's try to edit and make a table that would contain a schedule. All right. If we did something like this, what would happen? Course name, course number, credit hours, days, instructor. And then we had underneath that the course name, web development. The course number, CISS216. The credit hours, 3. The days met, Monday and Wednesday. The instructor, Zellers. Then maybe I'll just duplicate and change a few things on the second row. What would happen if I display this web page? What would it look like? Exactly. All we're going to have is just 2 lines of text, or actually 1 line of text that goes and then wraps around again. Why? Because HTML ignores the white space. What do I mean by white space? I mean the fact that there's a return at the end of this line. The fact that there's spaces in between it. So you can't create columns on a web page simply by spacing things out. All right? So just to show exactly what I mean, if I view this page in my web browser, that's what it looks like. All right? That's what it looks like. Again, it doesn't line it up into rows and columns because that white space is ignored. Any white space, that is any blank spaces or returns or tabs or anything like that, gets translated into a single space. So we lose the columns altogether. So for something like this, we need to use table tags. All right? There's really a handful of table tags. There's 3 or 4 main ones. There's a couple extra ones. And then there's a lot of variations that you can do with the styling of the tables through cascading style sheets. So let's look at the 4 most basic table tags. All right? And then we'll go in and we'll redo this page using table tags. The first basic table tag is the table tag. and that goes around the table. All right? Simple enough. There's a start table and an end table. The start table indicates where the table begins. The end table indicates where the table ends. This goes around the entire table. There'll be one of these per table. So in the case of my schedule, where I could have, 5, 10 classes, whatever listed, all right, there would only be one table tag. All right, so that is the first tag. The second tag that we'll look at is a TR tag. And TR stands for table row. And there's one of these TR tags per row in the table. All right? So there'll be a TR tag for my heading. There'll be a TR tag for my each data row then. Each row that contains class information. So the TR represents a row. Columns or cells in the table are represented either by THs or TDs. And the difference between the two is TH represents a table header, TDs represents table data. All right? So for the first row of my table, where I have headings, I would use the TH tag for each of the cells in that row. For each subsequent row, I would use a TD tag that would represent the table data. All right? So these are the basic tags for a table. There's really 4 basic ones. The table tag, for which there's one of per table. There's a TR tag, for which there is one of per row. And then the TH or TD tag, for which there is one per table cell. I'm going to go and I'm going to remove a lot of the code in this because I want to really focus just on the table. So I'm going to remove the CSS code and these other sections. And I'm just going to focus on the table. So let's go and let's create the table. So I'll go and I'll create my table tag. Yes, I do. I'll create my table tag. I'll create my TR tag. And again, notice how I'm indenting. As we've said before, indenting doesn't really matter to the browser. We could actually put all this on one line, all these tags on one line, but indenting makes it easier for you to follow the code. All right? So therefore, we typically indent. And for tables, it's typically important because we want to make sure that we get our rows and columns, everything in correct and done properly and nested properly. So therefore, the indenting really is important with tables. So in my first row, I'll put my headings. And since they're headings, they'll be in the TH tag. So I'll start, and the first heading will be for course number. The second heading will be for course name. The third heading will be for credit hours. The fourth heading will be for days. And then finally, we'll have a heading for instructor. All right. More than likely, the first row will have THs in it because more than likely, the first row of your table consists of the headings. Just like if you were doing an Excel worksheet. If you're doing an Excel worksheet, your first line would probably be the headings for what the columns, different columns mean. Each subsequent row then will probably be TDs because it will contain the actual data part of the table. One thing I like to do, again, if you notice, is as soon as I put in the TD, I put the NTD tag. Or as soon as I put in the TR tag, I'll put the NTR tag. That just helps me make sure that I remember to do that. Otherwise, I'm able to get caught up thinking about something else and forget to do that. So, let's go in and let's put a couple rows in here. Yes?
You don't have to put another TR tag?
Oh, no, my mistake. This should be a TR tag. Thank you. For those of us visiting class today, sometimes I make mistakes on purpose just to see if the class is paying attention. And I'll go in and I'll just make, since I don't type very fast, I'll go in and just add a couple of rows here just to give you a sense of what the table would look like. And in fact, I'll even duplicate the rows a couple of times just so that our table gets a little bigger. All right, so there's our first table row. Let's make a second table row at least. And now let's view the table that will consist of 3 rows. The first row containing headers, the second row containing data, and the third row containing another data row. So we'll save that and bring up this in the browser. And there we can see we have our table. And notice that the columns line up. They may not look exactly the way we would want them to, but the columns line up. In other words, underneath this is course number. Underneath this is course name. Underneath this is credit hours. Underneath this is days. Underneath this is instructors. So we do have a table of data. All right. Now, one thing to keep in mind, like any other HTML element, if we want to change the way this looks, we're going to do it via CSS code. Okay, so we'll put CSS code in here if we don't like the default way that it looks. Remember, the way your page looks is a combination of a couple different things. And one of the things are the defaults of the browser. All right? And the other thing is the CSS code that you put in for the particular elements. Now, let's notice a couple of things. All right? First of all, what's the difference between the THs and TDs? THs by default are bold. All right? What else about THs? It's a little hard to tell this. They're centered. Right? Really, the only one that you can tell that with is course name, because course name, you can see that it's centered over top of the course name. The other ones you can't tell because the titles are longer than the data. Therefore, it doesn't look like it's centered, but actually it is centered. All right? How wide is each column? It varies. That's true. Each column is not the same width. What does it look like determines the width of the column? Okay, we have one vote for the length of the header. Anything else?
Seems like it's the largest item in the...
Yeah. More precisely, it's the length of the largest item in the column. Now, to be sure, in this case, the headers are longest in most cases. But if you look, for example, at course name, web development is longer than course name, therefore it's wide enough to fit it in. So, if we don't specify widths or anything like that, the browser by default will make things as big as they need to be to fit everything in. All right? And that's nice in a way, and that's nice sometimes, but sometimes we want to put some control on our table and assign sizes to different things in the table. And again, that deals with the appearance, so that would be something that we would do via CSS. So, in other words, the length of the width of the table is really the sum of the widths of the columns. So, and how big is each column? As big as it needs to be to fit the biggest thing in there. So, in this column, course number, that's the biggest thing in there. Course, in this one, web development is the biggest thing in there. Here, credit hours is the biggest. Here, Monday and Wednesday is the biggest. Here, NORAD is the the word instructor is the biggest. So that's how it decided to make the table this big. Now, if we wanted to make the table bigger, all right, what could we do? We'd do that via CSS. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that just about anything that we studied for anything else applies also to tables. So let's say we wanted to make this table have a width of 500 pixels. All right, how would we do that? Well, in our style sheet, we could say table with, let's make it 600 pixels for good measure. Now if we look at the table again, we notice it's a little wider. All right? It used to go to about here. Now it goes out to there. Now, we specified the width for the whole table, but we didn't specify the width for individual cells. All right? We didn't say how big each cell should be. So how big do you think it made it? It sort of made it proportional to how much content is in it. In other words, this is the narrowest column because the data within it is the least amount of data. All right? This is the widest column because the data within that is the widest. All right? So if you don't specify individual columns, it sort of proportions it out based on the size of the data. All right? In addition to supplying an absolute size for a table, we could also specify a relative size for the table. So if we didn't want to make it 600 pixels, we could make it 60%. All right? Now, remember what it means when we give a percent. That's a percentage of the available space. Now, in this case, the table, there's no other elements in the body other than the table. There's just the table. So therefore, 60% would be 60% of the whole window. All right? So if we go and save this, it looks the same. Why does it look the same? Well, because 60% is about 600 pixels. Let's go and change this to 80%. There we go. And it made it wider. And again, notice that that's 80% of the available space. And since the table is the only thing on the page, right, the available space is the width of the entire window. All right? If we put that table inside of something, let's say we go in and we put this inside a content div. And we give the content div, say, a width of 800 pixels. The table disappears. that was weird. All right, we're back to there. Let's go in and put our div back in. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. That is unusual. Let's continue doing other things to this. Oh, forgot the quote up there. This is an interesting little issue. Let's notice what happened there. When I put that div in, it made my table disappear. Why? I was missing a quote up there. All right, I put in quote type equals quote text slash CSS, and I forgot to close my quote. So what does that do? What that does is the rest of this until here, it thinks is part of that declaration up here, part of that attribute. And the bottom line is that messes up the entire page. All right? What would help me catch that if I was having a hard time catching that? What's something I could do to troubleshoot this? Run it through the validator. Very good. The validator would catch that. Let's go and run this through the validator. And notice it gave me 7 errors. Now, the errors that it gives to you are not always very direct. But essentially what that's telling me is, hey, you forgot the quote. Because it ran into that ran into that less than sign when it didn't expect to see it. And therefore, it tells me that there's a problem. In fact, if you look very closely at the very last line, it says, another possibility is you forgot to close quotes in a previous tag. All right, which is exactly what I did. So if we go in here now and close our quote, we should be back in business. And there's our table back. Now, if we give the content div a width, let's say of 500 pixels, then the table will be 80% of that 500 pixels. Now notice what it did. All right? It wrapped around to fit everything in. You know, the browser is a clever piece of software. It's going to do what it needs to try to display everything. So if I give some impossible conditions, like I tell it that this needs to be only 80% of this 500 pixel div, that's too small for the table, yet it figures out a way to display it, and it figures it out by wrapping around some of the data. All right? Now, if I change this again to be something like 50%, let's say, let's make it 70%. All right. There we have everything on one line. We don't have anything wrapped around. And as we resize it, notice as it's going, everything's getting closer together, closer together. Boom. At a certain point, it will resize it and it will drop everything in a line. There's a certain point under which it won't get any smaller, though. Right? Why? Well, it's not going to split a word. Right? So it's not going to split the word development and put the D on one line, the E on one line, and so on. All right? So it will split that as much as it can, but again, at a certain point, it's not going to make the table any smaller. Now, what other things can we do with the table? Well, we can do anything we want to stylize the table, to give the background a color and the foreground a color, and so on. So let's go and do that now. I can go in and I can specify for the table. I can give a background color of, let's give a background color of a light gray. So I'll give it a background color of a light gray and a text color of black. And let's change the font. And let's change the font size. All right, so this whole table, the background of it is going to be # 6 C's, which is a light gray. All right. I know that even without having memorized a color chart, because if all these are the same, if these three pairs of letters are the same, I know that that's equal parts red, green, and blue, which means it's going to be a shade of gray. The text color will be black. All right. The font family, I give a choice of 3 font families. All right. Just in case a particular machine doesn't have a font installed. Typically, Macs will have Helvetica installed. Windows will have Arial installed. So I've covered 2 of the main platforms. If it doesn't have any of the above, it will give the generic sans serif font for that browser. And then lastly, I make the size 1.2M, which means 1.2 times the normal size. So effectively, it's 20% bigger than the normal text would be. So if we look at this, here's the result. All right. Now that I made the text a little bit bigger, again, it wraps it around. So let's go in. I don't really like that. So let's go in and actually let's just get rid of that content div. All right. Yes. Well, let's think about that. All right. That's a great question. The question was, can I put lines around the cells? Was that what you had asked? Yeah. How would we do that? How would we put lines around the cells?
Put borders around the TD.
Okay. If we put borders around the TD tags, and if we wanted around the TH tags, we could put it around them. That would do it. So let's go and do that. Let's go put a border around the cell. So I could say TD border 1 pixel. Let's make it stand out. So we'll make it red. And we'll make it solid. All right, and there we have, just around the TDs, we have boxes. Now, one thing to notice, all right, if you look real closely, right here, there's a little gap between those. All right, there's a little gap between the TDs. All right, between the borders of the TDs. If you want to get rid of that, what you say is border collapse, collapse. Two L's? Thank you. Or we Google it. No, because remember the padding isn't between things. The padding is from the border to the text. So we'll play with the padding in a second. Yes, but yes, the space between elements is normally the margin. I put it on the wrong place. Need to put it on the table tag. There we go. And there it collapsed the borders in between them. Notice what it did too is this border is 1 pixel. And if it didn't collapse the border, you'd have 1 pixel on the right of the first cell and 1 pixel on the left of the other cell, so it would make them 2 pixels. So if we adjusted the margin, we'd still have a 2 pixel border in between them. The border collapse, what that does is that smashes those 2 1 pixels together to give us that. Now, again, someone mentioned about padding. We can make padding by saying something like this, padding. Let's make a big padding, and we'll say 5 pixels. And notice what that does is that's the space from the border to the content. So not the space between things. Now, question. What if I don't like the fact that those THs are bold and centered? Maybe I like them bold, but I don't like them centered. How would I change that? How would I make the THs, instead of being centered, be left aligned? Yes?
Text align left.
Text align left. Right. So what I'd do, again, and what I'm illustrating is every other CSS thing that you learned for other elements also applies to tables. All right, so the CSS tools like text align and border and font and all that, anything that you put anywhere else, you can also put on table tags. So I can say text align left. And there it aligns the content to the left of the cell. With the table, yeah. I could put it, if I wanted to put this table somewhere specific, I could say, top 50 pixels, left 100 pixels, position absolute. And there it positions it there. Now, if I'm doing that, in this case, I better make sure this is the only table on the page, right? Because my style rule is for table, and therefore it would put any table at that position. So in this case, it works because I only have one table on the page. But if there was a page that had more than one table, then I would need to be careful with that. I couldn't use an absolute position. On the table tag, what I could do is I could give it an ID, like this. This would be the better way to do it. Maybe schedule. And then assign that table an ID. And it should work the same, which it does. Now, I think I've said this in the past, but let me reiterate something. Don't lie to your browser. All right? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is these are THs because they're table headings. These are TDs because they're table data. I may want table headings to look exactly like table data, because in this case they do. The headings and, well, they almost look the same. I would not make something a TD tag just because I wanted it to look a certain way. Likewise, I would not make something a TH tag just because I wanted to make it look like a heading. I would make it a TH or TD if it actually was data. I'd make it a TD. If it was a heading, I'd make it a TH tag. So, in other words, don't look and say, well, I have this table and I want my data to be bold and centered, so I'll put my data in TH tags instead. That's not a proper use of the tag because that's not a header in that case. All right? You can always go and style a TD tag to make it look any way you want. So create your HTML based on what the tags actually represent and not how you want them to look, because we can go in and we can make them look any way we want to. All right. Let's say I wanted to make the top row of this table, I wanted to make it inverted. In other words, I wanted the background to be black and the text to be gray. How could I do that? Okay. I could actually do this a couple ways. One way is I could, since that row consists entirely of THs, I could say TH, then say color, # background, black. And that would then reverse that row. That's one way I could do it. What's another way I could do it? What's another way I could do the same thing? Well, no, you don't put divs inside a table. Inside tables, you only put TRs and TDs. Well, the other thing I could do is I could give a style for the first row. I could give this a row, ID equals headings, and then in my CSS say headings, I want to be not that. And again, that works the same way. Which is better to do? I don't care. Doesn't really. There's no significant difference between doing it one way versus the other. Whichever way makes more sense to you, I suppose, is the way to go. All right. Sometimes with tables, and if you have something that's very wide, your eye has a tendency to move up or down as you're reading across. All right. That's why if you look in a newspaper, newspapers have separate columns. In other words, they don't typically run the text all the way across the page. All right? Because your eye tends to, if you're reading across a long line, your eye tends to drift either up or down. And you're liable to get confused and associate the wrong data together. Now, what they do oftentimes in printing, in fact, the old school computer paper used to be called green bar paper because it have alternating stripes of green and white, all right, to help your eye see and connect the data together in a row. What could we do in this table to make alternating rows different colors? Let's go add a couple more rows in simply by copying and pasting these. So now we got a bigger table. All right. And as you're reading across, again, it's possible your eye could drift up or down and associate the wrong data together. What's something we could do to make each row alternating? We could use classes. Now, why use a class instead of an ID? Right, because we want a group of elements to all have the same appearance. If I were to do this with IDs, I'd have to have an ID for this row, a different ID for this row, a different ID for this row, and so on down the line. If I instead give a class name, what I can do is I can associate with each alternating row that class and make all my alternating rows look the same. So, for example, I could create a style rule for the class of alternating rows. And I could give a background of white for those alternating rows and a color of black. All right. Then I would have to assign to each row, to each alternating row, that class. So for this row, I'll say class equals alt row. And I'll do that for every other row in my table. Yes. Yeah, you're right. In other words, if you went in and you decided to put a row between here, like right here, insert another row there, you're right. You'd have to go back and redo all those. Now, one thing to consider, though, is oftentimes this HTML is not written by hand, but it's generated through server-side scripting, in which case that becomes less of a problem. All right, but yeah, you're right. As it stands now, if I was manually maintaining this page and I wanted to insert a row, I'd have to go and adjust all the classes for that. So now, alt rows. All right, and there we have a table that has alternating rows, a different color, and again, that's just a little more readable for folks, because again, the colors help your eyes stay on the same line. Again, it's especially valuable when the table is wide and there's a lot of data in it. All right, so these are the main table tags. What we will do in the next class is we'll talk about some of the additional tags that are associated with tables. All right, and then we will talk about accessibility issues with tables. All right, people that can see, it's easy for them to interpret a table. All right, for example, if I want to know what day of the week this class meets, I simply look across and look up to the days column, and I see Monday and Wednesday. You know, your eye sort of looks at the column header, looks at the row header, and sort of looks at the intersection, and it knows that's what that means. If you cannot see this table, and a screen reader is reading it to you, it can be very difficult to keep track of stuff, because a screen reader will simply read this table in order. course number, course name, credit hours, days, instructors. By the time you get down, it may be unclear what a particular piece of data means. All right, so there's things that we can do from an accessibility perspective to make that much more accessible for people that are not that are visually impaired. All right. Any questions about this? Yes.
The table of chart that we're working on for like, how you want it to look for our next for the last.
Approximately. I mean, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. You know, you can use your own color schemes. You can use your own scheme for that. But yeah, this is a general idea for that. I probably will delay the lab that's due Monday, simply because we haven't talked about accessibility relating to those to the table. There's a few more loose ends we have to wrap up. So I probably will delay the deadline on that lab till Wednesday. I'll review that and post a notice to Angel. But yeah, approximately this is what your table will look like. Instead of showing classes and course names and all that, it'll show browsers, or it'll show rather years, months and years. Then it will show, you know, IE, Firefox, other, or did I add Google Chrome in there? Google Chrome and other. And then it will show a table of numbers like this. Other questions? Yes?
If you had to leave one of the cells blank, what would you do?
If you wanted to leave one of the cells blank, that's an excellent question. If, let's say, you know, this is an internet class, so it doesn't have days and days associated with it, and we left it blank, all right? Actually, that didn't do what I thought it would do. But normally what you do, if you want to make a blank cell, depending on the browser, blank cells can cause a little bit of trouble. And depending on your border settings and other things. So typically what you do is you put in ampersand NBSP semicolon. That stands for non-breaking space. All right? Because remember, the browser doesn't really do anything with white space, right? So therefore, if I put a space in there, the browser is going to ignore it. So if I put in a non-breaking space, that more or less says, hey, I really want a blank space in here. In which case, then the effect isn't any different on this particular browser, but on other browsers there could be an impact between that. But yeah, you put a non-breaking space in there if you have an empty table cell. Other questions?
Yeah, in the ampersand sign, the one that triggers errors on the validator.
Right. Right, but it triggers errors on the validator when it's not used properly. This is an example of using it properly. If I said something like this, you know, classes and stuff, that would be an improper use of it. So I would have to do like that. Whereas this is exactly what the ampersand was meant to do, to precede these sort of special codes. So because MBSP is a special code, that is appropriate use of that, and it won't cause a validation error. Good question. Other questions? All right. I will go and unlock the, well, I'll go and save this to Angel, then I'll be upstairs to unlock the lab. I don't know if our guests are coming to lab or not. That's pretty much just a free time for the folks to work on their assignments. You're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome, if you don't want to come, you're also welcome not to. So we'll see you up there.